My name is Megan Calloway. I'm 32 years old, and the afternoon my parents told me I was no longer welcome in their home, I learned something that nobody puts in greeting cards. Some families don't want the truth. They want a villain, and whoever gets assigned that role first is the one who stays in it. My brother stood in my parents' living room with his arms crossed and his voice shaking just enough to sound wounded without crossing into obvious performance. He told them I had squandered the money, that I had made reckless decisions with the investment account my grandfather left us, that his half was gone because of me. My mother pressed both hands to her mouth. My father's face went through about 6 emotions in 3 seconds before landing on the one that looked like disgust. Neither of them asked me a single question. My father just pointed at the front door and said, "Get out. We trusted you with something important, and you destroyed it. As long as you can't explain what you did, you are not welcome here." My brother looked at the floor when my father said it, not because he was ashamed, because he didn't want me to see the relief in his eyes. I drove to my apartment in complete silence. No radio, no music, nothing. I sat in the parking lot for about 12 minutes before I could make myself go inside. Then I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the refrigerator and tried to remember how breathing worked. Here is what I want you to understand, before I tell you anything else. I had not touched that account. I had not made a single transaction, recommendation, or phone call about it since the day our grandfather died, and the estate attorney sent us both the account documents. I was a paralegal at a small firm in Charlotte. I understood fiduciary responsibility probably better than anyone in my family. The last thing I would do was gamble with inherited money. But when your own mother won't look at you and your own father is pointing at a door like you're a stranger who wandered into the wrong house, the truth starts feeling very small and very far away. So I didn't scream. I didn't beg for 5 minutes to explain myself. I picked up my purse, walked out, and drove home. 2 weeks later, I was eating cereal for dinner at 11 at night because I had worked late and hadn't gone grocery shopping, when a notification popped up on my laptop. New email. The sender was an automated address I almost didn't recognize. The subject line made me set my spoon down. By the time I opened the attachment, I understood exactly what my brother had done, why he had done it when he did, and why he had needed someone to blame before anyone started asking questions. My phone lit up 40 minutes later. First my brother, then my mother, then my father, all within the same hour. I stared at their names on the screen and thought about my father's finger pointing at that door. Then I turned my phone face down and went back to reading. But before I tell you what was in that email, I need you to tell me something first. If your own parents threw you out of the house because your sibling lied about you, and you could prove it, would you? Or would you walk away and let them keep the version that was easier for them to believe? The answer to that question is what this whole story is really about. The truth is, what happened in that living room wasn't sudden. It was the finish line of something my brother had been building for months without me knowing. His name doesn't matter as much as his pattern does. He was 4 years older, effortlessly charming, and had spent the better part of his adult life being the son my parents pointed to at dinner parties. Successful in a vague way that nobody ever fully examined, good at showing up to the right events with the right energy. The kind of person who never did anything so wrong that he couldn't explain it away with enough warmth and eye contact. Our grandfather had passed the previous winter, and the estate had been split cleanly between the two of us. Not a massive amount, but enough to matter. Each of us received a share placed in a managed investment account through the same firm our grandfather had used for decades. We were supposed to leave it alone, let it grow, use it responsibly. That was the whole point. I left mine alone. My best friend since college, Danny Okafor, was the first person I called after I left my parents' house. Danny worked in corporate auditing, which meant she spent her professional life finding the thing that someone didn't want found. She also had the singular ability to be furious on your behalf while staying completely logical, which is the exact combination you need when your world has just collapsed. She showed up at my apartment the next morning with coffee and a legal pad and absolutely zero patience for my self-doubt. I told her the whole thing. My brother's accusation, my parents' reaction, the fact that I had never touched the account, not even to check the balance, because I had been told by the estate attorney to wait for the annual statement. Danny wrote something on the legal pad and then looked up at me and said, "That's a very specific lie. Specific lies don't come from panic. They come from preparation. I said maybe I had missed something. Maybe there was a document I had signed without fully understanding. She put the pen down flat on the table. She said, "You are a paralegal. You read documents for a living. Stop doing his work for him." Then she said the thing I needed to hear. When did he start building this? That's the question. Not what did you do. What was he doing before he needed you to be guilty? The next morning, I pulled out every document from the estate, every letter from the attorney, every account statement I had received, every email I had saved. I spread them across my kitchen table and went through them the way I would have gone through discovery documents at the firm. Slowly, methodically, looking for the thing that was missing or the thing that didn't match. The account statements I had received showed a healthy balance. No withdrawals, no unusual activity. Everything looked exactly as it should. Which meant either my brother was lying about losses that didn't exist on my side, or the losses he was describing were in his own account, and he had redirected the narrative in my direction before the next statement could arrive and make the timeline obvious. I texted Danny. "I think his account is the one that's been touched. Not mine." She replied in under a minute. Who else would know? The estate attorney was a man named Gerald Weston, who had handled my grandfather's affairs for about 15 years. He was methodical, slightly formal, and the kind of professional who treated every piece of information like it belonged in a sealed envelope until explicitly authorized otherwise. I didn't expect him to tell me anything about my brother's account. But I needed him to know that I was asking questions, because people who are hiding things behave differently when they realize someone is paying attention. I called his office and asked for a copy of every document bearing my signature from the estate proceedings. Nothing more, nothing invasive, just my own records. His assistant said she'd put the request through. That same afternoon, Danny called me about a name. A financial advisor named Terrence Webb who had worked with our grandfather's account and had, apparently, also done some private consulting for my brother in the past year. She had found this through a mutual connection at a networking event, the kind of coincidence that only feels like coincidence until you realize how small certain professional circles actually are. He agreed to meet us for coffee near his office downtown. He was a compact, careful man who chose every word like he was writing a contract. He started with the standard professional caution. He couldn't discuss client information. He wasn't in a position to make characterizations. Family matters were complicated. Then Danny leaned forward and said, "We're not asking you to violate anything. We're asking you to confirm whether what Megan is being accused of is even technically possible given the account structure." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The accounts were structured with individual authorization. No co-signatory access. One account holder cannot make transactions on the other's account." I felt something cold and certain settle into my chest. "So, if money moved," I said, "it would only be traceable to the account holder." He looked at me steadily. "That's correct." He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. On the drive back, Donnie said, "He just told you everything, without telling you anything." "I know," I said. She glanced at me. "So, what's the next move?" I had one idea, and it was a long shot. When I had first received my account documents from the estate attorney's office, they had been sent to my work email at the firm rather than my personal address, because I had been in the middle of updating my contact information and the attorney had used the address I gave him during our first meeting. The firm's system had auto-forwarded them to my personal inbox, but my work email address remained on file with the account servicer as a secondary contact. If the account servicer had ever generated an automatic notification, a quarterly summary, a corrected statement, anything clerical that went to a secondary contact on file, it would have gone to my work address first. An address that was still active. An address I still had full access to. I hadn't checked the account-related folder on my work email in months because I had assumed everything was being handled and there was nothing to check. I pulled up my laptop that evening and started going through every automated email I had archived. 3 months earlier, there was one. From the account servicer. The subject line read, "Account notification secondary contact on file." I almost skipped it because the preview looked like a routine privacy policy update. I opened it. It was a notification that my account number had been used as a reference in a related transaction inquiry. The servicer was flagging it as a possible administrative mismatch and asking the secondary contact to disregard if no action had been requested. I read it 3 more times. Then I called Danny. She said, "That means someone used your account number as a reference point for something. Not to access your funds, to create an association. Like building a paper bridge." I stared at the ceiling. "He was going to claim the money left both accounts," I said, "or that mine was used to authorize something on his side." Danny was quiet for a second. "He needed your account number to make the story work. That's why he had to blame you before the statements arrived. The problem was that this email was suggestive, but not proof. It showed a connection attempt. It didn't show what happened next, or why, or what my brother had actually done with his share of the inheritance. For 3 days, I hit walls. The estate attorney's office sent my documents and everything looked clean on paper. Terrence Webb wouldn't give me anything more than he already had. My parents weren't speaking to me. I drafted and deleted about a dozen texts to my brother that ranged from professional to profane. One night, I sat at my kitchen table with everything spread out in front of me and thought, maybe I don't win this. Maybe I just walk away. Get a new city, new apartment, new chapter. Let them keep their version. I was about halfway to convincing myself that was the smart play when my phone buzzed. Danny had sent me a screenshot of a court docket. A creditor judgment filed against my brother 6 months ago. A personal loan company. $34,000. She had found it through public records. Underneath it, she texted, "He didn't lose your grandfather's money on bad investments. He needed it to pay off a debt he didn't want your parents to know about." I was on my feet before I finished reading. The next morning, I went into the firm early, before anyone else arrived, and I went through every email in my work inbox from the account servicer. There was the notification I had already found. And then, buried 3 folders deep in the autosort archive, there was something else. An account summary, sent 8 weeks ago, not to my personal address, to my work address alone. The servicer had generated a consolidated account summary as part of an administrative review, and because my work email was listed as a secondary notification contact, it had been copied automatically. It was not confidential. It was not protected. It was a routine document that had been routed to me through a completely legitimate clerical process, the same way my original estate documents had been. I opened the attachment. I read it once. Then I made a cup of coffee and read it again. My account showed exactly what I expected. Untouched, steady, exactly as my grandfather had left it. My brother's account, which appeared in the same summary because the estate had linked them as related accounts during the initial administration, told a different story entirely. $41,000 withdrawn across 9 transactions over 7 months. The withdrawal dates lined up almost perfectly with the creditor judgment timeline. 3 transactions had been coded with reference notes that included a partial string resembling my account number, which explained the mismatch notification I had received earlier. He had used my account number as a ghost reference in his own transactions, not to steal from me directly, but to create documentation that could later be read as my involvement if anyone came looking. My hands didn't shake when I read it. I had been a paralegal long enough to recognize a paper trail being constructed in reverse, and once I saw it clearly, it was actually almost simple. This was the document. This was why my brother had needed to make me guilty before the statements arrived. He had known this summary was being generated. He had known his own account would show exactly what he had done. And he had known that if he moved first, loudly, with my parents as his audience, I would be on the defensive instead of asking questions. I texted Danny 3 words. "I have it." She called immediately. "Tell me everything." I did. By the time I finished, she was already pulling on her jacket. She said, "Do not send anything to anyone yet. We do this right." We met at my apartment and built the case the way I would have built a discovery package at the firm. Chronological, sourced, no emotional language, no accusations that weren't supported directly by the documents in front of us. The administrative notification showing the account mismatch flag, the consolidated summary showing the withdrawal pattern, the public court record showing the creditor judgment, Danny's timeline matching the withdrawal dates to the debt repayment window. I thought about confronting my brother first. Part of me wanted to see his face in the moment the performance stopped working. I drove to his apartment on a Tuesday evening. He answered the door in a t-shirt with the easy confidence of someone who had not yet realized the ground had shifted under him. When he saw my expression, something flickered in his eyes. Not guilt exactly. More like calculation. I didn't wait for him to say anything. I held up the account summary and said, "I know about the withdrawals." He went very still. Then he said, "That's not what it looks like." I said, "Which part? The 9 transactions, the creditor judgment, or the reference string that has my account number in it?" He crossed his arms. "You don't understand how the accounts were structured." "I'm a paralegal," I said. "I understand exactly how they were structured." He tried the next version. He said the debt was temporary, that he had planned to replace what he withdrew before the annual statements went out, that he had never meant for any of this to happen. I stepped closer and said, "But you did mean for me to be blamed for it." He opened his mouth. I said, "You stood in Mom and Dad's living room and let Dad point me out the door. You said nothing. That wasn't panic. That was a plan." He looked away. When he looked back, whatever had been performing behind his eyes was gone, and what replaced it wasn't remorse. It was resentment that I had figured it out at all. "Fine," he said quietly. "What do you want?" 4 words. No sorrow, no apology. Just entitlement wearing the skin of damage control. I thought about my father's face when he pointed at that door. I thought about my mother pressing her hands to her mouth and not once asking me to explain myself. I thought about driving home in silence and sitting on my kitchen floor. "I don't want anything from you," I said. "I'm going to send this to Mom and Dad, and I'm going to send a copy to Gerald Weston's office, and then I'm going to stop thinking about you." He called twice before I reached my car. I didn't answer. I drafted the email that night at my kitchen table. Danny sat across from me and reviewed every sentence. We kept it factual. No anger, no drama, no language that could be dismissed as emotional or retaliatory. I addressed it to both my parents, copying the estate attorney. In the body, I stated clearly that I had been accused of mismanaging inherited funds without any evidence or opportunity to respond. I stated that I had since received, through a standard administrative process, a consolidated account summary, showing that no withdrawals had been made from my account, and that the withdrawals in question had originated entirely from my brother's account over a 7-month period consistent with a creditor judgment filed against him in public record. I attached the summary, the mismatch notification, and a screenshot of the court filing. I wrote one final line at the bottom. I did not destroy anything. I was set up to carry blame for a problem I had nothing to do with. I will not accept that quietly. I sent it at 9:47 inches the evening. By 10:23, my phone was ringing. My brother first, twice, then my mother, then my father. I let all of it go to voicemail. The texts came next. My brother, "We need to talk before you do anything else with that." My mother, "I don't understand what I'm reading. Please call me." My father, 20 minutes later, "Come home. We need to sort this out as a family." And then, 11 minutes after that, the one that told me everything I needed to know about what was actually happening in that house. My father again, one sentence. "This needs to stay between us." That sentence. That single sentence told me they had seen the documents and understood exactly what they showed. And their first instinct was not, "I'm sorry." It was, "Contain it." I put my phone in a drawer and went to bed. The next morning, my mother called 6 times before 9. On the 7th call, I picked up. She started crying before she finished saying my name. I waited. She said, "We didn't know. Megan, we genuinely didn't know." I said, "You didn't ask. There's a difference." She said they had been scared, that my brother had been so convincing, that the numbers he showed them had seemed clear, and she hadn't thought to question them. I said, "What numbers did he show you?" Silence. I said, "Mom, what specific documents did he present to you that made you believe I had taken anything?" Longer silence. Then, very quietly, he showed us a spreadsheet. He said it was the account records. "A spreadsheet he made himself," I said, "not an official statement. A document he typed." She started crying harder. I said, "You threw me out over a spreadsheet my brother made on his laptop." The silence after that was the loudest thing I had ever heard from my mother. I told her I had forwarded everything to the estate attorney and that it was no longer just a family matter. I told her I was not calling to fight. I was calling so that she would understand clearly what had actually happened and what I expected going forward. She asked me to come home. I said, "I'll think about it." That was not true. But I wasn't ready to say the real answer out loud yet. My father texted that afternoon asking me to come to the house for a conversation. He used the word conversation the way certain men use it, as a container for something that is more of a performance review. I went because I needed to hear whether either of them was capable of saying something honest now that the lie had stopped working. My brother was there. He looked like a man who had spent 24 hours rearranging the version of himself he planned to present. My mother had clearly been crying for most of the day. My father stood near the window with his hands in his pockets, which is what he does when he wants to look composed. He opened with, "You could have come to us first." I said, "You didn't give me a chance to come to you first. You gave me the door." My brother started talking about pressure, about the debt, about how things had spiraled faster than he expected, about how he had never planned for any of this to land on me specifically. I looked at him and said, "But when it needed to land somewhere, you chose me." He didn't deny it. He said, "I thought you were tougher than this." I almost laughed. "Tougher than what?" I said. "Being falsely accused by my own family and evicted from my parents' house without a single question?" My mother said his name sharply. He went quiet. My father looked at the floor and said, "What do you need from us?" It was the first real question anyone had asked me since the whole thing started. I said, "I need you to say out loud that I did not mismanage anything, that I was accused without evidence, and that what you did was wrong." My father rubbed the back of his neck. My mother nodded immediately and said, "Of course. Of course you didn't. We know that now." I looked at my brother. He met my eyes for about 3 seconds and then said, "I'm sorry for what happened. Not I'm sorry for what I did. I'm sorry for what happened. Like it was weather." I stood up. My father said, "We want to fix this." I said, "You want to close it? That's different." He had no answer for that. I walked out for the second time. The estate attorney, once he reviewed everything, initiated a formal accounting process for both accounts. My brother had to return the full amount he had withdrawn, structured as a repayment against his share of the remaining estate. He did not lose everything. People like my brother rarely do. But he lost the one thing he had always relied on, being the version of events that everyone accepted before the documents arrived. The attorney's office sent me a written confirmation that my account showed no unauthorized activity and that I bore no liability for any transactions in the estate. I framed it in the same way some people frame diplomas. Not because I needed validation, but because I had learned that certain things are worth keeping in writing. A few weeks later, my father texted and asked me to come to Sunday dinner. My mother left me a voicemail saying she had been thinking about what I said and that she knew they had failed me. It was the closest she came to an apology that didn't include the word "but." My brother sent one message. He said he hoped we could eventually get past it. I read it twice, decided I had nothing useful to add, and did not reply. There's something people don't say about these stories. They talk about the reveal, the confrontation, the moment the truth lands. What they don't talk about is the quiet afterward. How strange it is to have been proven right and to feel not triumphant but just tired. Tired of having needed to prove it. Tired of the fact that you had to build a case to earn basic fairness from people who were supposed to love you first and ask questions second. I kept going to work. I kept eating cereal for dinner when I worked late. I started actually checking my account balances. Not because I was worried, but because I had spent too long trusting that everything would be fine without paying attention, and I wasn't going to do that again. Danny helped me repaint my living room on a Saturday in November. She brought the wrong shade of white and we ended up with something closer to pale yellow, and she said it looked like morning light, which I chose to believe. We ordered pizza and sat on the drop cloth in the middle of the floor and she said, "For what it's worth, you handled this better than I would have." I said, "You literally found the court judgment." She said, "I found the evidence. You decided what to do with it." That's the harder part. She was right. The harder part was never finding the proof. The harder part was deciding that you were worth the effort of finding it. A month after everything settled, I had one final conversation with my father. He called instead of texting, which told me he had thought about it. He said he had been trying to figure out what to say and hadn't found the right words yet. I told him I appreciated that he was trying. He asked me whether I thought we could rebuild things. I said, I don't know yet. I need time to trust that if something happened again, you would ask me before you believed someone else. He said he understood. Maybe he did. Maybe that's the most honest answer a parent can give when they've gotten something that wrong. About 6 weeks after the estate attorney completed the accounting, my parents asked me again about Sunday dinner. This time I went. It was quieter than it used to be. My brother was not there, which I suspect was arranged on purpose. My mother made the pot roast she makes when she wants to say something without saying it. My father poured me a glass of water and set it on my placemat without ceremony. And I understood that as a small, sincere gesture from a man who does not know how to apologize loudly. We didn't talk about any of it. We talked about my job, a book my mother had been reading, a leak in the kitchen faucet my father had been avoiding for 3 weeks. It was ordinary in a way that felt deliberate, like everyone had agreed, without saying so, that ordinary was the first step toward something more. I drove home that evening thinking about what it means to forgive something versus what it means to understand it. I hadn't forgiven my brother. I wasn't sure I was going to. What he had done wasn't impulsive. It had been constructed, piece by piece, with my name as a structural element. But my parents were something more complicated. They had failed me through a combination of habit and convenience, and the particular blindness that comes from trusting the person who speaks first and loudest. That wasn't malice. It was weakness. And weakness is harder to be angry at than malice, because it doesn't give you anywhere clean to put the feeling. I still had the account summary saved in 3 places. I had the estate attorney's written confirmation. I had Danny's text thread, and the court docket screenshot, and the administrative notification that started the whole chain. Not because I planned to use them again, but because I had learned something about myself in the process of finding them, that I was not willing to carry blame that didn't belong to me, that I was not going to stay quiet and small and cooperative while someone else built a story using my name as the foundation, that the moment proof existed, it was mine to use. People talk about revenge like it has to be loud to count, like it has to look like fire, like public humiliation, like someone visibly destroyed. Mine looked like a consolidated account summary attached to a very calm email. Mine looked like a single sentence at the end of a document I spent 3 hours writing. Mine looked like a phone I turned face down and left in a drawer. Mine looked like not answering. And when my father finally asked what I needed, the real answer was never a dramatic reckoning. The real answer was just the simplest possible thing. Someone should have asked that question first. That's all I ever wanted. Not the last word. Just the first question. And here's what stays with me. Now that it's over, and the documents are filed, and the account is intact, and the pot roast has come and gone, when people only come looking for the truth after the proof corners them, is that love? Or is it just shame? Wearing a warmer face than the one it had when it was pointing at the door? I think you already know the answer. I think you've known it for a long time.